I am a certified geezer, so very little that I read or view in the news shocks me anymore. However, I was genuinely shocked when I read that the anti-vaccination group led by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. celebrated the news that the rate of polio vaccination in Rockland County, New York, had declined even as cases of polio, including one severe enough to cause paralysis, began to show up there. According to a recent article in the online news site Ars Technica, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s anti-vaccination organization has called the decline in the childhood polio vaccination rate the silver lining of the COVID-19 pandemic, even as wastewater sampling in New York State is detecting a rising level of poliovirus in samples taken in Rockland County, as well as in parts of New York City. Other news sites have reported that these anti-vaxxers have been targeting ultra-orthodox Jewish communities in and around New York City with vaccine misinformation. Polio is an infectious disease which is relatively easily spread, especially in areas with poor sanitation. Approximately 72% of children infected with the polio virus exhibit no symptoms whatsoever. However, they can remain infectious and spread the virus to others for several weeks after they are infected. About 24% of children infected have minor symptoms, such as a headache or sore throat. The polio virus normally infects the gastrointestinal tract, but it can move into the central nervous system where it can cause more severe symptoms. Most patients with central nervous system involvement develop what is called non-paralytic aseptic meningitis, with symptoms of headache, neck, back, abdominal, and extremity pain, fever, vomiting, stomach pain, lethargy, and irritability. A small fraction of polio infections, estimated at between 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 200, progress to the point that some paralysis occurs. Most often, the paralysis affects the lower limbs, but in some cases can affect the head, neck, and diaphragm. The most severe cases can result in death. Some polio patients who experience paralysis recover completely. Some are left only with some muscle weakness, and for some, the paralysis is permanent. In the most severe cases, the patient's breathing must be assisted with a mechanical device. The first such devices were called iron lungs because of their construction. These days, ventilators are used instead of iron lungs to assist the patient's breathing if necessary. While only a small fraction of those contracting polio suffer lifelong paralytic effects, a rather large number of those who have recovered from polio experience debilitating consequences later in life. While the exact percentage is unknown, somewhere between 40% and 80% of those who recover from more serious cases of polio develop post-polio syndrome. Post-polio syndrome is characterized by muscle weakness, pain, and fatigue. The effects often are like those of chronic fatigue syndrome. For those who have recovered from paralytic polio, the onset of post-polio syndrome usually is from 15 to 30 years after recovery. However, the onset can be much later, especially for those who have recovered from non-paralytic polio. In addition, women tend to be affected by post-polio syndrome more frequently than men. Since I am officially a geezer, many of my friends and colleagues were born before the advent of polio vaccines. Some of them contracted polio when they were children, and 2 women who were faculty colleagues of mine were forced to retire early from my university because they were experiencing post-polio syndrome. Several polio vaccines have been developed. Here in the United States, Dr. Jonas Salk developed a vaccine based on inactivated strains of 3 different wild polio viruses. After extensive trials, the Salk vaccine was released to the public in 1955, and millions of Americans received injections of this vaccine. While the Salk vaccine proved very effective at reducing the incidence of polio in the United States, problems occurred when about 100,000 doses of the vaccine manufactured by Cutter Labs and Wyeth Pharmaceutical were not properly inactivated. About 40,000 cases of polio and 10 deaths resulted from the use of these improperly inactivated doses. I received one of these inactivated polio vaccine injections when I was a high school student back in the day. A very effective oral polio vaccine was developed by Albert Sabin. This vaccine used attenuated versions of the 3 wild polio strains. After extensive testing in the Soviet Union, where the Sabin vaccine was administered to some 10 million children, the Sabin oral polio vaccine became available commercially in 1961. Because the oral polio vaccine was much easier to distribute and administer, it supplanted the Salk vaccine in the United States. For the same reason, oral polio vaccines still are widely used in underdeveloped countries. I received this vaccine when I was a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania. There is a problem with the use of oral polio vaccines. The attenuated polio viruses in the oral vaccines do not cause polio, but if they are shed into the environment, they can over time mutate back into the live polio viruses. While those who have been vaccinated are protected from the mutant live viruses, unvaccinated people are not protected and can catch polio from them. This is a problem in areas with poor sanitation where not everyone is vaccinated. Here in the United States, an enhanced potency trivalent inactivated polio vaccine was approved for use in 1987 and is the vaccine of choice here now. 4 doses of this vaccine are required for complete immunization. 2 doses are given shortly after birth, a 3rd dose is given between 6 and 18 months, and a 4th booster dose is given between 4 and 6 years of age. Both the inactivated polio vaccine and the oral polio vaccines are very effective. Through the use of these vaccines, polio was eliminated in the Americas by 1994. The polio vaccines also are very safe, but as with almost all pharmaceuticals, there are contraindications and risks. The inactivated polio vaccine contains trace amounts of the antibiotics streptomycin, polymyxin B, and neomycin. Anyone who has had an allergic reaction to these antibiotics should not be given the inactivated polio vaccine. Likewise, anyone with a history of anaphylaxis should not be given the vaccine. The oral polio vaccine, because it causes a very mild polio infection, can in very rare cases trigger Guillain-Barré syndrome or GBS. It is estimated the rate of such events is less than 1 in 100,000 doses. The rate of GBS in the US is about 1 or 2 cases per 100,000 per year ordinarily. Most people who contract GBS report having an infection of some sort in the previous 6 weeks. So the conclusion is that the oral polio vaccine causes GBS with about the same frequency as other infections cause GBS. Given the effectiveness and safety of the inactivated polio vaccine used in the United States, I find the efforts by the anti-vaccination zealots to dissuade people in the Orthodox Jewish communities to forego vaccination for polio to be reprehensible. There is no religious reason whatsoever for Jews to avoid polio vaccines. In fact, Rabbi Yitzhak Yosef, who currently serves as Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, citing Deuteronomy 4:15, called on the public to vaccinate their children against polio. I hope you have found this video informative, and if you have young children, please listen to your pediatrician, not the anti-vax crowd when it comes to vaccinating them. If you haven't already subscribed to my YouTube channel, I would appreciate it greatly if you would subscribe. Thanks for watching. If you have questions, please add them to the comments section and I will do my best to answer them.